Some men get a warning before their past walks through the door. A phone call, a mutual friend with a heads up, a text from someone who knows someone who saw something coming. Me, I got Jesse Hartley, my floor manager. 29 years old, 3 years with me. The kind of person who can read a room the way a ship captain reads weather. Came through the kitchen doors at 6:40 p.m. on a Wednesday in September, with her clipboard pressed flat against her chest and the expression of someone who has just watched a car accident and is trying to decide how to describe it. Cole. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice she used when a health inspector showed up unannounced or a party of 12 arrived without a reservation. There are people at table 7. They said they didn't need a reservation. She paused. They said you'd understand. I understood. I hadn't spoken to any of them in 4 years. I set down the tasting spoon, folded my apron over the counter, took one breath. Just one. Because the kitchen doesn't stop for your feelings, and pushed through the doors into the dining room. Mercer's sits on the ground floor of a converted warehouse on Northwest Gleason Street in Portland, Oregon, the Pearl District for those who know it. The neighborhood where old industrial bones got dressed up in reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs and somehow became the most sought-after dining real estate in the city, without losing the feeling that something real happened here once. I opened 8 years ago with $180,000, a line cook with 12 years of experience, and a specific kind of certainty that only people who have never actually run a restaurant possess going in. The certainty that if the food was good enough, if the space was honest enough, if I showed up every single day and gave it everything, the rest would follow. It followed. Eventually. After 2 years of 7-day weeks. After one winter, where I personally showed up at 5 a.m., 6 days a week, because I couldn't afford 2 openers. After the Oregonian gave us the review that changed everything. Mercer's is the kind of restaurant Portland needed to remember it had. And after the James Beard nomination that I didn't win. But that sat on the wall anyway, because the nomination alone made the reservation line ring for 3 months straight. The name above the door was mine, the brass lettering hand-cut, installed on a Friday afternoon by a sign maker named Pete, who charged too much and was worth every penny. Said Mercer's in letters that caught the evening light in a way that still made me stop and look every single time I came through the door. Mine. Built by me. From nothing. Which is exactly why what Deidre was about to do was so spectacularly, impressively wrong. She was at table 7, my best table. Corner window view of the street, the light in the evening hitting it just right. She hadn't asked for it. She had simply sat there. The specific entitlement of a woman who assumes that any room she enters has been arranged for her arrival. Beside her was Bryce, my son, 24 years old. Deidre's eyes, my jaw, and somewhere in the combination, an expression I had last seen on a teenager who had never once been told that the world didn't orbit him specifically. He'd grown a beard since I'd last seen him. It didn't help. Across from them. And this was the detail that told me everything about how the evening was going to go. Was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, dark suit. The specific posture of someone who bills by the hour and wants you to know it. An attorney. They brought an attorney to my restaurant. To my best table. Without a reservation. Deidre looked up when she saw me walking across the dining room. She did the thing she always did when she wanted to appear warmer than she was. The slight softening around the eyes. The almost smile that said, "We're still reasonable people, you and I." And said, "Cole, thank you for coming out. Thank you for coming out." Like I was a guest in my own restaurant. "You have about 20 minutes before this floor fills up." My voice came out even and level. Whatever this is, say it fast. The attorney opened his briefcase, produced a document, professionally bound, tabbed. The kind of paperwork that costs more than most people's car payments to prepare, and slid it across the white tablecloth. Bryce leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. He learned that from his mother. 15%, Deidre said, of Mercer's transferred to Bryce's name as a silent partnership stake. You sign tonight. We're done. I looked at the document without touching it. Then I looked at Deidre, then at Bryce, then at the attorney, who had the carefully neutral expression of a man being paid enough to not have opinions. You drove up from Sacramento. My voice came out. Hired an attorney, had documents prepared, and showed up at my restaurant on a Wednesday night without calling. We knew you wouldn't take our calls. There's a reason for that. Cole. Deidre's voice shifted into the register I remembered from every difficult conversation we'd ever had. Patient, slightly sad, the tone of someone who has decided they're the reasonable one and will perform that decision until you agree. Bryce made some mistakes. He needs your help. You have this. She gestured at the room, the vaulted ceiling, the gleaming bar, the staff in their neat black aprons. You have all of this. He has nothing. I thought about the 4 years, the 31 calls I had made before I stopped making them, the Christmas I spent in my apartment above the restaurant, eating leftover family meal with Nora, because neither of us had anywhere else to be, and we decided that was fine. The 2 years I spent quietly paying off a debt they didn't know I knew about. What did Bryce do? My voice came out. Bryce shifted in his chair. First time he'd moved since I walked up. Investment deal, Deidre said. A property development partnership in Phoenix. The partner turned out to be, there were issues. Bryce lost everything he'd put in, and the investors are pursuing him personally now. How much? The number they're looking at is around $180,000. I kept my face still. $180,000, the exact amount I had opened this restaurant with. The amount I had spent 8 years turning into something real. The amount Bryce had apparently lost in a Phoenix real estate deal that had issues. A 15% stake gives him collateral. Deidre continued. Something to show his investors. It buys him time to negotiate. And if the investors come after the stake, that won't happen. You don't know that. Go, you're asking me. My voice came out, quiet and precise. To put a lean risk on my restaurant for a bad investment that your son made. After 4 years of silence, the table was very quiet. The attorney adjusted his pen. Bryce looked at the window. You owe this family, Deidre said. The warmth was gone now. This was the other voice, the one underneath. I know your landlord, Marcus Reed, has been a client of my firm for 6 years. One conversation, and I can make your lease renewal very uncomfortable. There it was, the threat underneath the smile, the reason they'd driven 400 miles on a Wednesday. I looked at her for a long moment. Then, give me until end of service, 10 o'clock. I'll come back to this table. Deidre settled back, satisfied the way she always looked when she thought she'd won. That's all we're asking, she said. I walked back to the kitchen. I did not panic. I want to be clear about that. What happened next required complete calm. And I had it, because I had spent 8 years building something that could not be taken from me, and I had spent every one of those years knowing, in the back of my mind, in the place where honest people keep the things they hope they'll never need, that this moment was coming. Not this table, not this Wednesday, but the shape of it, in the kitchen. I sent one text to 2 people. The first, they're here, table 7, need you both. Don't come in yet. The second was to my daughter. 3 dots appeared immediately from the first number. Then, "On my way. Don't sign anything." From the second number, a moment later. "Already outside. I've been here since 6 o'clock." I hadn't known that Nora had known they were coming before I did, and she had been parked outside this entire time. You're watching sweet family revenge. If that table just made your jaw tighten. If you felt that moment when the warmth disappeared and the threat came out. Hit subscribe right now and drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. City, state, country. This started in a restaurant in Portland, Oregon, and I want to know how far it travels. The kitchen at Mercer's runs on a controlled kind of chaos. Every station has its rhythm. The grill speaks in heat and timing. The cold station is precise, measured, quiet. The pass is where everything comes together. The last 12 inches between what we made and what the guest receives. And it requires a specific kind of attention that blocks out everything that isn't the plate in front of you. Standing at the pass at 7:15 p.m. on a Wednesday with Deidre and Bryce and their attorney at table 7. I was not giving it that attention. Nora noticed. My daughter had been running the kitchen at Mercer's for 2 years, 26 years old. She had my hands, broad, quick, built for this work, and her grandmother's patience, which was the more important inheritance. She had been my sous chef before that, my line cook before that. And before that, she had spent 3 summers during college driving up from Eugene on weekends to help me paint walls and install shelving and haul equipment because she believed in what I was building before I was certain I believed in it myself. She appeared at my elbow without a word, the way she always does when she has something to say and is deciding how to say it. "How long have you known they were coming?" My voice came out, low enough for the pass. 2 days. Bryce texted me. He thought I'd... She stopped. Started again. "He thought I'd talk you into it." "What did you tell him?" I blocked him. And she wiped down the pass with the focused energy of someone doing something with their hands while their mind is somewhere else entirely. And then I called Grandma. I stopped. You called Margaret. She deserved to know they were on their way. She, Nora glanced at me sideways. She told me to call Frank. I looked at my daughter for a moment. Margaret Mercer, 78 years old. My mother. The woman who had transferred her late husband's pension money into this restaurant's build-out account 8 years ago with a single phone call and the words, "Your father would have wanted it to go to something real." And the woman who, at the quiet suggestion of Frank Aldridge, my attorney, my friend, had been formally documented as a silent beneficiary of an irrevocable trust connected to Mercer's equity structure since the day we opened. The woman who held a 12% beneficial interest in this restaurant. The 12% that Deidre's attorney had apparently not thought to look for. "Is Frank outside? My voice came out. "He's in your office," Nora said. "He got here at 6:30. He brought the original trust documents." She paused. "And the equity structure filing. And..." Another pause. A very long legal pad. I almost smiled. "Keep the line running." My voice came out. "I'll be back." Frank Aldridge had been my attorney for 22 years. He had helped me negotiate my first restaurant lease when I was 32 and operating a 12-seat breakfast spot on Alberta Street that no longer exists. He had helped me structure the LLC when Mercer's was still a business plan on a cocktail napkin. He had suggested the irrevocable trust in the early days of the restaurant. Quietly, without pressure. Because he understood that the people who show up when you're building something are not always the same people who appear when you've built it. He was 64 years old, silver-haired, and had the specific posture of someone who had spent 3 decades in rooms where the most important thing was to be the calmest person present. He was sitting at my desk when I came in, a legal pad in front of him covered in handwriting, 2 folders open beside it. and a cup of the kitchen's coffee that someone, Nora, undoubtedly, had thought to bring him. He looked up when I closed the office door. "Your ex-wife's attorney," he said without preamble, "is a civil litigator out of Sacramento named Patrick Hale, mid-level firm, good reputation for contract work. He prepared the equity transfer document." He tapped the legal pad. "The document is technically competent. The problem is what it assumes, which is that you are the sole owner of Mercer's Restaurant, LLC. Frank opened the top folder. "You're not. You haven't been since 2016. The irrevocable trust gives your mother a 12% beneficial interest. That interest is protective. It cannot be diluted, transferred, or encumbered without Margaret's written consent." He looked at me steadily. "Hale didn't pull the trust filing. Either he didn't know to look for it, or didn't think it existed, or Deidre didn't tell him it might." "That's possible," Frank said. "More likely he did a standard LLC ownership search, saw your name as the managing member, and stopped there. It's a common oversight with older trust structures that predate the current database integration." I sat down across from him. "What does it mean for the document they brought?" "It means the document is unenforceable as written." And he said it the way you say something that should be obvious. You cannot transfer 15% of an entity in which 12% of the equity is held under protective trust without the trust beneficiary's consent. The math doesn't work. 15% of 88% available equity is technically possible, but the transfer would trigger the trust's protective provisions, which require Margaret's written authorization. "Has anyone called Margaret?" "Nora did, about 20 minutes ago." Frank set down his pen. "Margaret said, and I'm quoting directly because I was on the line, 'Absolutely not. And tell Deidre I said hello.'" I sat with that for a moment. My 78-year-old mother, who had been woken up on a Wednesday evening, and whose first instinct was to protect something she'd put her late husband's money into 8 years ago, and whose second instinct was to send a message. "There's something else," Frank said. He opened the second folder. "You mentioned Deidre threatened your landlord, Marcus Reed. She said he's been a client of her firm for 6 years. He has." Frank looked at me. "He's also been my racquetball partner for 11 years. I called him at 6:45. The briefest pause. He was unaware that Deidre had any connection to him professionally and was, his word, not mine. Deeply uninterested in being used as leverage in a family dispute. The threat had evaporated before I even knew it was being dealt with. I leaned back in my chair. "What do I do with the document they brought?" My voice came out. "You have options." Frank folded his hands on the legal pad. "You can end this right now. Walk out there. Tell them the trust makes the document void, and ask them to leave. That's the clean path." "Any other options?" Frank Aldridge has known me for 22 years. He understands when I'm asking about options, and when I'm asking about something specific. "There's a second path," he said. "More complicated. But if you want everything on the table, the 4 years, the debt, the specific arithmetic of what this family has cost you, there's a way to use tonight to accomplish that. Tell me." He talked for 14 minutes. When he finished, I was quiet for a moment. "Can Nora handle the service line without me until 10? "I already asked her," Frank said. "She said," and I'm again quoting directly, "Tell Dad I've been handling it without him since Friday." That was my daughter. That was absolutely my daughter. If you've been watching for a while and you want stories like this to keep coming, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Honestly, most people never do, and it's what keeps this channel running. So, genuinely, thank you, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from right now. I went back to the dining room at 8:30 p.m. The restaurant had shifted into its late evening rhythm, the dinner rush giving way to the dessert and coffee crowd, the noise level dropping to something more intimate. The bar doing its steady business. It was the hour I liked best. The hour when Mercer's felt most like what I'd imagined it would feel like when I was 32 years old, sketching floor plans in a diner booth at 2 o'clock in the morning. Deidre looked up when I approached table 7. The careful neutrality she'd been wearing all evening had softened slightly. The wine helping. The weight helping. The assumption that a man returning to a table has already made his decision, and it's the decision you wanted. She had always been good at reading people. She was about to have a bad night with it. I've been thinking about what you said. I sat down, looked at Bryce, who was on his 3rd glass and had the slightly unfocused attention of someone who has been sitting in a restaurant for 2 hours, waiting for his mother to handle something. About family. About what it means to help. Deidre's expression shifted. The warmth came back. The real-looking version she deployed when she thought she was winning. "I'm glad," she said. "I need to ask you something first." I kept my voice easy, conversational, the tone of a man working something out. "The build-out loan, 8 years ago. Do you remember it, Small? But I've been watching Deidre's face for 23 years, which is longer than her attorney has been practicing law, and I caught it." "What loan?" she said. "The $60,000 gap in the build-out budget. The money that came in 3 weeks before opening. You remember? It came in as a wire transfer. You were on the joint account at the time. It showed up and you asked me about it, and I said it was from a private investor, and you said, mm-hmm, and asked what we were doing for dinner." The table was very quiet. Bryce looked at his mother. "I don't know what you're—" Deidre started. "The investor was my mother." My voice came out. "Margaret Mercer. She transferred the money from my father's pension fund because she believed in what I was building, and because you weren't paying attention. And I stopped trying to explain it." But I kept my voice level, informational, the tone of someone reading from a document. "What I didn't tell you, what I should have handled differently, is that Frank Aldridge suggested we formalize the arrangement. My mother holds a 12% beneficial interest in Mercer's through an irrevocable trust. It's been filed since 2016. It's a matter of public record." Deidre looked at her attorney, Patrick Hale. To his credit, did not visibly react. But his hand moved to his briefcase with the instinct of a man who wants to look at documents he now suspects he hasn't looked at carefully enough. "The document you brought," my voice came out, "assumes I'm the sole owner of this restaurant. I'm not. The 15% transfer you're requesting cannot be executed without my mother's written consent, per the trust's protective provisions." I paused. I called her tonight. She said no. "That's..." Deidre looked at Hale. "Can they do that? Is that legal?" Hale had the expression of a man who is doing math he doesn't enjoy. "If the trust is structured the way he's describing, yes. The protective provisions would..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I'd need to review the filing." "Frank has copy in my office," my voice came out. "He's happy to walk you through it." Deidre was very still. In 23 years of knowing her, I had seen her angry. I had seen her calculating. I had seen her perform warmth and perform sadness and perform patience. I had never seen her caught. She didn't know what to do with it. Neither did Bryce, who had lowered his wine glass and was looking at the table with the expression of a man who has just understood something he wishes he hadn't. Some negotiations end with a signature. Some end with a door closing. Some end with a 24-year-old man putting down his wine glass and looking at his father across a restaurant table and saying in a voice that sounds nothing like his mother's, "Dad, I didn't know about the trust. I didn't know about any of it. And I..." He stopped, looked at his hands. "I didn't want to be here tonight. I want you to know that." I had expected more of Deidre, more leverage, more argument, more of the performance that had characterized the last 3 hours. What I had not expected was my son. Deidre and Patrick Hale had spent 15 minutes at the table while I was in the kitchen. I didn't know what they talked about. I knew that when I came back, Hale's briefcase was closed. His pen was away. And the bound document, the 15% transfer, the product of legal fees and a 400-mile drive, was folded once and sitting on the edge of the table like something that had already been decided. Deidre looked at me when I sat down. The performance was gone, not replaced by honesty. Exactly. Deidre and honesty had always had a complicated relationship, but replaced by something more tired, something that had run out of its own fuel. The trust makes it complicated, she said. The trust makes it impossible. My voice came out. As written, without Clear's throat, my mother's consent. Would she stopped. Tried again. Is there a version of this where she agrees? No. A pause. Cole. Then she said my name the way she used to say it in the early years, before we had acquired the specific vocabulary of people who had stopped being kind to each other. I'm not trying to destroy what you've built. Bryce is in real trouble. Whatever else is true, that part is true. I believe you. My voice came out. I believed you 3 hours ago. The trouble is real. The solution you brought isn't. Bryce looked up. What if there was a different solution? He said. I looked at my son, 24 years old, the beard that didn't quite work yet, the voice that had lost the teenager in it while I wasn't watching. He looked in that moment more like my father than I had ever noticed before. Talk, my voice came out. Here's what I had not known about my son. After the Phoenix deal collapsed, after the investor pursuit began, after the legal notices started arriving, after the number $180,000 became the number that defined his entire life. Bryce had not called Deidre first. He had called Nora. She told me this later, standing at the pass during the final push of service, her voice carefully neutral in the way it gets when she's telling me something that matters and doesn't want to editorialize. He called me about 3 months ago, she said. He wasn't doing well. He asked if I thought you'd talk to him. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know, that 4 years was a long time and you hadn't been the one who stopped calling. She paused. Then I told him if he ever wanted to actually be part of something real, he should show up and work for it, not ask for it. And he said he would think about it. She picked up 2 plates for the pass. And then 3 weeks later, Mom called him and told him about her plan, and he didn't know how to say no to her. She glanced at me. He's not her, Dad. He doesn't know how to be separate from her yet. He's 24. I sat with that. 24 years old, 3 months of quiet calls to his sister, and then a mother with a plan and a 400-mile drive and a document he hadn't wanted to be part of. At the table. Bryce talked for 12 minutes, not to his mother. To me, the Phoenix deal. A property development scheme run by a man named Gary Fielding, who had a track record in 3 states that Bryce had not checked because he was 22 and certain and had been raised to believe that certainty was the same as knowledge. The investors. 3 of them. Pooled capital now pursuing Bryce personally for their share of the loss. The amount. $180,000 of which Bryce had personally guaranteed $60,000 with assets he no longer had. I'm not asking for the stake, he said when he finally stopped. That was Mom's idea, the collateral thing. I need to figure out the $60,000. The rest I can negotiate. I looked at my son for a long moment. Deidre was quiet. Patrick Hale was looking at the window. Here's what I can do, my voice came out. And this is not a gift. This is a business transaction. It goes through Frank. It has terms. It has a repayment schedule. You will sign a document that is nothing like the one you brought tonight. Bryce looked up. I'll loan you $60,000 at 3% interest over 4 years. Monthly payments. Automatic transfer. If you miss 2 consecutive payments without communication, the note accelerates, and I pursue recovery through standard legal channels. I kept my voice even. Businesslike. The tone of the 12 years I had spent learning to run a restaurant before I thought about owning one. In exchange, I want one thing. What? You come work here. Not as an owner, as an employee. Line cook. 3 shifts a week starting at the beginning. You learn how this place actually works from the bottom. If after a year, you're still here, and you're still paying the note, we'll talk about what else is possible. Bryce stared at me. Deidre started. Cole, that's not Deidre. My voice came out quiet. Final. This conversation is between me and my son. She stopped. Bryce looked at me for a long moment. The line, he said slowly. Like actually cooking. Nora runs the kitchen. You'd work under her, which means you do what she says when she says it, what? Without argument. She has earned every inch of her authority in this kitchen, and you haven't earned an inch yet. She'd, he almost smiled. She'd love that. She would, my voice came out. She absolutely would. Another silence. Okay, Bryce said quietly, without the crossed arms. Okay, my voice came out. Deidre left at 10:20 p.m. She left the folded document on the table. Patrick Hale picked it up on his way out, tucked it into his briefcase, and gave me the brief nod of a man who is professionally required to be on the other side of things, and personally finds the situation interesting. I respected that. He was doing his job. The job had just run into an equity trust his client hadn't disclosed. I walked them to the door, not as a courtesy, because it was my restaurant and I saw every guest to the door, which was a habit I had developed on our first night of service and had never broken. At the entrance, Deidre paused. The trust, she said. Not accusing, just processing. You knew when I walked in tonight. You already knew. Frank knew. My voice came out. I hadn't thought about it in years. I had to be reminded. I looked at her. That's the difference. Deidre, you drove 400 miles and spent money on an attorney and brought documents to a restaurant without checking whether the documents made sense. I built something that already had answers to questions you hadn't thought to ask. She looked at me for a moment. Then she walked out. I watched her car pull away from the curb on Northwest Gleason Street. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. No victory, no particular satisfaction. Just the specific quiet of a room where the furniture has finally been arranged correctly after years of being slightly wrong. Frank left at 11 o'clock. He shook my hand at the office door, tucked his folders under his arm, and said, Your mother wants to know if you'll come for dinner Sunday. Tell her yes, my voice came out. She also wants to know if Nora will come. Tell her Nora will decide for herself, and Margaret should call her directly. Frank almost smiled. Your mother said you'd say that. She said to tell you that's why she likes Nora better. She's not wrong, my voice came out. He left. The last table cleared at 11:15. The staff broke down the dining room with the efficient quiet of people who have done this enough times that it has become its own kind of music. Chairs on tables, stations wiped, the lighting changing from dining warm to working bright. I helped, the way I always do, because there is no version of running this restaurant in which I am the person who watches other people close it. Bryce was in the kitchen. He had come back from the table at 10:30 and asked Nora if he could help with breakdown. She had looked at him for a long moment, with the specific assessment of someone deciding whether a thing is worth their time, and then handed him a bus tub and pointed at the shelving. He had not complained. He had not looked for approval. He had just started working. I stood at the pass and watched my son wash dishes in my restaurant at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, and felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years. Something that didn't have a clean name. Something adjacent to hope. Nora found me at the pass at midnight when the last task was done. She was still in her chef's coat, flour on the left sleeve from the bread service. She made all our bread from scratch, which was her decision, and which I had agreed to because the bread was extraordinary, and because she was right about it. She stood beside me and we looked at the dining room together. Empty. Quiet. The reclaimed wood on the walls, the brass letters above the door catching the streetlight through the window. "He's coming back Saturday," she said. "First shift." "I know. I'm going to work him hard. I know that, too." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad?" Her voice shifted into the register she uses when she's about to say something she's been holding for a while. "Grandma called me after Frank called her tonight, after she said no to Deidre." "What did she say?" she said. Nora stopped, thought about how to carry it. "She said Dad's father always believed that the thing you build is only worth what it passes on, not what it earns, what it passes on." She looked at me. She said she didn't put money into a restaurant. She put money into you. A pause. "And she wants to know if the trust can be amended to include Bryce. Eventually, if he earns it." I stood at the pass of my restaurant at midnight on a Wednesday. 8 years of 6 o'clock in the morning starts, and 7-day weeks, and the specific labor of believing in something before it believed back. My daughter beside me. My son washing dishes in the kitchen. My mother on the phone at 78 years old, protecting something her late husband's money had helped build. And Deidre's document folded once, already in Patrick Hale's briefcase on its way back to Sacramento. "Tell her yes," my voice came out. "Tell her absolutely yes." Nora nodded. Then she went back to the kitchen to check on her brother. I stood at the pass alone for a moment, looked at the brass letters above the door. Mercer's. My name. My place. Ours now. That felt right. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Tell her yes. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Tell her absolutely yes. Nora smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need celebration, because it already knows the answer belongs exactly where it landed. She nodded once, wiped her hands on the towel tucked into her apron, and disappeared back into the kitchen to check on her brother. The sounds of dinner service returned almost immediately, plates meeting the pass, someone calling for another order of mashed potatoes, the soft rhythm of people who had worked together long enough to understand each other without raising their voices. I stayed where I was for another minute, hands resting lightly on the worn oak counter. Then I looked up at the brass letters above the dining room entrance. Mercer's. My name. My place. Ours now. It struck me that names don't become meaningful because they're engraved in brass. They become meaningful because of what people experience after walking through the door beneath them. Every family who celebrated an anniversary here, every couple who got engaged at the corner table by the window, every exhausted traveler who found one good meal after a difficult day, every employee who started as a nervous teenager and eventually trained someone else. Those moments had quietly polished those brass letters far more than any cleaning cloth ever could. Ownership, I realized, isn't really about possessing a building. It's about accepting responsibility for everything that happens inside it. Years ago, I thought success meant having my name on the sign. Now I understand that the sign was never the achievement. The achievement was creating a place worthy of carrying it. There had been seasons when I wasn't sure any of this would survive. Bills stacked higher than reservations, equipment breaking at exactly the wrong time. Long nights wondering whether one more difficult month would finally be too much. Looking back, I can hardly remember the numbers anymore. What I remember are the people who stayed, the cook who worked an extra shift without being asked, the server who comforted a family after a funeral dinner, the dishwasher who became a chef, the regular customer who quietly paid for a stranger's meal because he remembered what hard times felt like. Restaurants aren't sustained by recipes alone. They're sustained by people deciding, over and over again, to take care of one another. I think families work the same way, not because everyone agrees all the time, but because enough people choose to keep showing up when it would be easier not to. That decision, repeated often enough, becomes tradition. Tradition becomes trust. Trust becomes home. Maybe that's why standing beneath those brass letters felt different that evening. I wasn't looking at a business anymore. I was looking at everything we'd built together. One ordinary day at a time. The name above the door belonged to me, but the story inside belonged to all of us, and somehow that made it even more valuable. If this story leaves you with one thought, let it be this: don't chase the sign. Chase what makes the sign worth reading. Build something people remember because of how they felt while they were there. Whether it's a home, a family, a small business, or simply a life lived with integrity, the name attached to it will eventually take on the character of the care invested in it. That's the only kind of legacy that grows stronger with time. I looked once more at those brass letters, listened to the familiar sounds coming from the kitchen, and smiled. Mercer's. My name. My place. Ours now. After everything it had taken to get there. I couldn't think of a better ending than that. And somehow, I had the feeling it wasn't really an ending at all. It was simply another evening, another dinner service, another family finding its place around a table that would still be waiting for them tomorrow. And that, in the end, was exactly the kind of future I'd hoped to build.